Franklin, you're writing about Manafort for The Atlantic, you know, following the story. And we've just got the news about the American President Trump writing on his Twitter about the Ukrainian sabotage on the US elections. You know, we are following the story, so of course it's connected about the fact that some kind of Ukrainian politicians were digging into Manafort's story, which was helpful for Hillary Clinton. But really, can you explain to us how big this story could be? What is really could be an evidence how serious is this story? Because we kind of understand that it's a counter-argument over the Russian meddling.
Exactly. Every time Trump faces an accusation, he tries to find a counter-accusation. You say Trump is corrupt, well, there's crooked Hillary, and she's just as bad or if not worse. And so that's what he's faced the worst week of his presidency, where it seems like his son has been caught almost red-handed about collaborating with the Russians. And so he's never been more desperate to find a new narrative, a new storyline. And so he's looking for whatever he can find. So he points to Ukraine. Well, you say Russia interfered? Well, Ukraine interfered. Everybody interferes, and this is what happens, and I'm being unfairly targeted as the victim. So politically, it's very important for Trump to find something that he can, and it'll catch on. It's going to become an important part of the narrative. Fox News, Breitbart, the American right is going to just build and build this story. And so it might be a little uncomfortable for Ukraine now, but it's going to get worse because Trump doesn't let go of a storyline.
And what do we know about this Ukraine meddling? What is the ground? I mean, I have the three stories about the Alexandra Chalupa, who used to work for Hillary Clinton campaign, with an American citizen with the Ukrainian roots. There was a talks about she was talking to the Ukrainian ambassador. There was a Ukrainian MP giving the information about Manafort. But really, you look at that because you're on the story. You kind of know what we can really confirm. What was really the Ukrainian role in that?
Almost nothing. I mean, it is nothing to say the Ukrainian role. You have a couple of actors who are disconnected, who aren't part of a master plan to subvert American democracy. You have people who were freelancing, who were working on their own because they wanted to see Donald Trump lose or wanted to see Hillary Clinton win, or they had information that looked like it was going to be newsworthy and relevant. But it wasn't a conspiracy that started at the seat of Ukrainian power to try to affect the election. It's a bunch of scattered pieces of evidence that don't connect into an important narrative. It's hardly anything like what the Russians tried to do to the American election, where every single part of the American intelligence community has concluded that Vladimir Putin himself directed an effort to try to influence the election, to elect Donald Trump, and to sow paranoia and chaos in American democracy.
If you look at the bits and pieces of the story about the Ukrainian interference, it's more or less all even those pieces of evidence said that the Ukrainians, some politicians, some officials, some people connected to the Ukrainian community said that the Manafort used to work for the Ukrainian dictator, who is partly responsible for the massacre here.
Right. So that's the complaint. It's that the Ukrainians were supposedly spreading opposition research, negative information about Paul Manafort, which is, I think, first of all, it's a legitimate story. It's an important story because Paul Manafort helped install a dictator in this country, helped promote him, helped polish his image. And that's an objectively very important and good story. Then if you add the information that we've learned over the course of the last year about all the illicit, illegal money that he received and that he was laundering, that itself is an important story. And so I don't really understand what the accusation that Donald Trump is trying to make. He's saying that the story about Paul Manafort is illegitimate because a couple Ukrainians were talking about it. It doesn't make any sense. But it's not important for Donald Trump's story to make sense. What's important for him is to have anything that he can say that tries to change the subject.
Why do you think today? Why do you think these days?
Because Trump is desperate, and Manafort is testifying this week before the Senate to try to say everything that he knows about this meeting that happened in Trump Tower. The meeting with a Russian real estate lawyer and with this music producer that was trying to lobby them about the Magnitsky Act. And so Trump needs anything that he can get. And right now he's running out of defenses. And so where does he turn? He turns to the one place where he seems to have some little bit of traction, which is this conspiracy that he's created about Ukraine.
What do we really know about this story about Jared Kushner, about son-in-law, Trump's son-in-law? And
right, so we don't know. I mean, this is one of the things that's really annoying about this scandal and this story is that it's about a year. There's a year we've been talking about Trump, we've been talking about Russia, we've been talking about Manafort, we've been talking about Ukraine, and we keep getting fresh pieces of evidence that make it seem like there's something terrible that happened, but we don't know exactly what that terrible thing is. And so we learned about this meeting that I just discussed in Trump Tower, and it's the first time that we have something concrete where you have Russians who are connected to the government who show up saying that they have evidence that Hillary Clinton did something wrong, and the Trump people accept the meeting. Now, it doesn't seem like anything came of that meeting, and we don't know why they were so eager to take that meeting, but all the tangible evidence, all the concrete pieces of evidence finally suggest that the Trump campaign was open about wanting to work with the Russians to discredit Hillary.
And Franklin, you know, it's still, especially when you're not in the States, there are new and new details. There is again some kind of another allegation, Comey, then Jared Kushner, and somebody else, and another gossip about, you know, Tillerson being fed up with Trump, and, you know, the gossips on the reputable media. How serious is that? Can this really, the Russian relations, all this evidence can bring us really for something big? Because in the end, you kind of try to you are losing the feeling, how important are all these, you know, Jared Kushner.
Donald Trump is unlike anything else in American history. And so Democrats want to see him removed from office. They're desperate. You never have a situation like this where the opposing party is so desperate to see the other guy leave office. And you have this story that exists that it just keeps getting worse and worse. We don't know what's there in the middle. We don't know what the actual substance of the story is, but we know it looks terrible. Trump acts like he's guilty. And so they say it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. And Donald Trump and everybody around him keeps covering up. They keep lying, they keep making mistakes, they keep giving fresh energy to an investigation. And Democrats are going to continue because they keep getting so much traction with it. And it's not like people care. If you look at the broad population, they don't like Donald Trump, especially because they think that he's a clown. They think that he tweets too much. They think that he hasn't done anything in the first couple months of office, which is all true. They don't care about the Russia scandal. They're not going to care about whatever he says about Ukraine. It all seems like, but we're talking about a legal procedure in the end. The Democrats want Trump to be removed by office through impeachment. And so they need to bring charges against him. They need to show that he's committed a crime. And even if Donald Trump didn't commit a crime at some point in his life, he's going to have made mistakes here that will mean that he was committed perjury, that he fired people in possibly illegal sorts of ways, and it's too irresistible for the Democrats, and he may have broken the law.
And since we are here in Kiev, in Ukraine, it's where Paul Manafort spent years. The question would be, why this story is significant? Why why still Manafort story matters, as he was fired.
Right. Well, I think part of it has to do with we don't know what's the middle of the scandal and what it's really about. And you look and you say, okay, the Russians tried to interfere in the American election. We know this is as close to fact now. We know that Paul Manafort worked for a pro-Russian dictator. We know that he worked for oligarchs close to Vladimir Putin. And so if you're trying to complete the narrative to figure out, it's very natural to turn to Paul Manafort and say that he's there in the center of the narrative. We don't know that he was in the center of the narrative. We don't know what his role was. Maybe it's just a coincidence that you have this guy who has all sorts of ties back to the Kremlin, who was working in the middle of a campaign that was supported by the Kremlin. Maybe it's just coincidence, but it's very, very suspicious looking. And that's why journalists keep coming back to this story. But I would argue that even if Paul Manafort had nothing to do with collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign, he's still a very significant villain in American history, because he came to Kiev, he helped promote a dictatorship, he stole money that came from the Ukrainian people. And so if this is an opportunity to pay attention to that story that Americans usually don't care about, then that's an important thing too.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for clarification.